We have to recognize that violence, unfortunately, is part of every tradition, but that it is not central to any one. For me, compassion is at the heart of my religion and at the heart of why I strive individually to make compassion more central to the way that Muslims see the world and see their relationship with ourselves and our neighbors. The idea of a charter of compassion for world religions is not just a great idea, but an idea that's really critical for human survival and interfaith cooperation in a very, very difficult and perilous time in human history. I think that the golden rule is a universal rule. It's in the Abrahamic tradition throughout the Bible and the New Testament and the Quran. It compels people to recognize that our humanity is really woven into the humanity of all other people, that caring for people, that believing in the mutuality of our existence is really central to not only the faith traditions that we're part of, but also to what we aspire to as human beings in creating a different kind of world. But I think also the idea of compassion, or Rahman as we would say in the Quran and in the tradition of Islam, becomes central not only to us as we pray, because we invoke the name of God, most compassionate, most merciful, in every prayer that we make, but also becomes important in terms of how we see ourselves internally. So I'm a big believer in the idea that the internal dialogue and the internal interrogation of our own selves as Muslims is critical to the way that we want to and need to shape Islam in the not only the now but also in the future. That we need to focus more as Muslims on what it means to be compassionate within our own community, but compassionate as part of a interconnected human community that we also have responsibility for. And what we want to do and what compassion would compel us to do is to raise the visibility of these initiatives to the point where the good that interfaith people are doing and the good that religious folk are doing becomes more apparent and the violence becomes less and less so. There are practical things that people of religious persuasion and non-religious people ought to be able to agree on, and one of them is the survival of humankind being paramount, the cooperation of people across racial and national and cultural and class lines being paramount, that being a good neighbor to whoever your neighbor is being paramount. And so I believe that these are foundation values that ought to be permeating the discourse across and within faith traditions. And I also think that it's really important to recognize that people of faith can create common platforms of understanding, that we recognize that religions aren't all the same in everything that they believe and everything that they advocate, but that the thing that we have to advocate is mutual respect, nonviolence, the respect for human and civil rights, the centrality of women in all faith traditions that is very often not in the public discourse. And when these things really become part of how we operate, that faith and belief will be a positive rather than a negative factor in the way that people communicate and people work together. My mother, who was a great gardener and a wonderful Christian woman, picking tomatoes and giving them to a white homeless man who had come into our backyard looking for food. And both of them began to cry because it was such a moving experience that this little black lady grew these tomatoes and gave them to someone she didn't know because purely out of a sense of love. That at the level of human love for ourselves and our Creator, there ought not be divisions, and that Muslims should be and must, like our brothers and sisters in other traditions, demonstrate that kind of hospitality and that kind of acceptance and love, regardless of the religious conviction of those who we find as neighbors.